In this special edition of the Insight podcast from HReSource, we're going to be talking to a number of individuals who've studied, reviewed, and in part participated in our latest survey. Well, as I'm joined by an expert in employment law, head of employment law at Morton, Fraser solicitors, Innes Clark, a question for Innes, top of the shop, would be on grievances, because in the HReSource survey, we found that in 2018, when we previously run the survey, or last run the survey, there was an even split between the people that said that there would have been an increase or not an increase, so 50-50 split. We've seen a drop-off in our survey responses. It said only a quarter of people said that there had been an increase in 2022. Does that resonate with you, Innes?
I think in terms of what we're seeing, I wouldn't say there's been a drop-off, nor would I say there's been an increase. It's probably just the same as usual for us in terms of the volume and the number of grievances received. Still plenty of grievances out there, though.
Yeah. And in terms of the makeup of those grievances, are you seeing any particular trends?
Well, I suspect we tend to just get involved in certain circumstances. A lot of these grievances will be dealt with internally at HR level, and thankfully no need to involve lawyers at all, which is ideally how it should be. You want to keep lawyers out of the process if it's all possible. But where we tend to get involved, and where I would say we have been involved a lot in the last year, is where a grievance is raised by an employee as part of another process that's ongoing. So, for example, there might be a disciplinary process, and a grievance is raised as part of that, and we're asked to advise on how best to handle it by the employer. Or an employer might be going through a redundancy process, and a grievance is raised in the context of that redundancy process. So it's that sort of situation we're quite commonly involved in, along with also perhaps multifaceted grievances where there's a significant number of issues, and it's really just quite a difficult one in terms of how best the employer should deal with it. So we certainly see all sorts of circumstances, but I would certainly highlight the grievance as part of a different process as being a trend there. And the other trend I would say we've seen a fair bit in the past year, not just in the context of grievance processes, but also in the context of disciplinary processes, is an individual making a subject access request at some point during the process or in advance of the process to try and recover information that might give assistance to them. So that was something we probably, going back a few years, it would only happen every now and again, whereas now it's almost standard if there is a proper legal dispute, if you like, that a subject access request will be made by the individual at some point.
Yeah, because obviously they want to furnish themselves with as much information as background data as possible for their particular case. Yeah.
Well, that's right. There's a bit of a fishing expedition, and sometimes it will throw up things that are of use to the employee, and sometimes it won't. But I suppose the key point from an employer's perspective is just be very careful as to what is put in emails, and never put something in an email that you're not completely comfortable with showing to the individual at some point of time, or indeed reading it out in an employment tribunal at some point in time. Absolutely. So people do need to be careful about what is put in writing, and that any language is appropriate and professional.
I'm here with Lucy Cotterell, HR consultant with Mogers, Drewett. And one of the things I want to ask Lucy about the HReSource survey, because I know we've had conversations before about workload, out of the survey, it became clear that there was a significant number of individuals who were talking about a significant increase in their workloads. That was also reflecting on 2022 and leading into what they could see coming ahead of them for 2023. Does that resonate with you? Do you agree with that, Lucy?
Yes, I think personally and and professionally, yes, I think there has been a significant increase in workloads. I think that some of that has come about from obviously the impact of the pandemic. So lots of people choosing not to either continue with work or do some other type of work, which clearly has an impact on people in organisations who are left behind and have to pick up that work. And I think there's been a slight reluctance maybe, or a slight trepidation by employers to backfill some of those roles around the uncertainty of what's happening, particularly in the economy, which then has meant people that they've already got employed have to pick up the extra workload. So I think that has been a significant impact.
Yeah, it's the sort of fallouts we've had now from the pandemic, isn't it? They're sort of catching up with us, and people who are already sort of weary from where they were before are thinking, well, at least we've got through it now, and then finding out that actually the relief, the cavalry hasn't arrived yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think because I think that the whole uncertainty around where work is going to come from, is it going to increase, is it going to reduce?
Yeah.
Employees haven't necessarily had that crystal ball to say what's going to happen next. So they've had to tread carefully on ensuring that their resource is going to match their future needs. And I think that's been a very challenging time for employers.
So Sarah, delighted to have you come and share your views on the HReSource survey. But the first thing I've got to say is the way you describe yourself on your website is fabulous, because I've known you, and we were just talking about this, more years than we care to remember. But the way you describe yourself is perfect, because you say that you laugh like, or somebody says you laugh like a dragon.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you work in risk health and safety, risk management. If somebody
I'm trying not to laugh like a dragon now, because it does boom out.
If somebody tells you a really funny joke, do you have to sort of get a fire extinguisher out or something?
Yeah, could do. Just go chortle quietly to myself.
But you run a successful partnership, RedCat partnership, as a health and safety consultancy. So you're going to have an interesting perspective in terms of and we'll touch on the risk bit right at the end.
Okay.
But first and foremost, I mean, we would just touching on this workload and coming through the pandemic and decide, how have things been for you?
Workload, at the beginning, we felt like we had to do so much just to keep our heads above water.
Yeah.
And we're only a small consultancy. There's only 4 of us, and it's 4 of us that really matter, because we all have our own families and our own expenses and whatever. But for us, it really showed that we could manage risk properly.
Yeah.
And it gave us an absolute trust with our clients. Our clients were asking us, in some respects, in their heads, life or death questions. Can we do that, or can we not do that? Because at some points, the government was saying, we're all going to die. And it was a difficult one to wade through the morass of information that was out there. And I still remember some days just literally scrolling through documents and Twitter and other social media channels and doctors' reports and all sorts, to actually really get to the nuts and bolts. What does COVID really mean for the man or woman on the Clapham Omnibus, our clients? How do we need to protect ourselves as a start? So workload massively peaked and then poodled along really quite nicely, but at a reasonably high level. Because there were some days I was on version 3 or 4 of a client's risk assessment, because the government was changing their guidelines. And I think I developed a bit of a love-hate relationship with Chris Whitty, but he was a joy. I think he still will stand on my pedestal as the good guy from COVID.
Voice of reason and sense. You know?
Yes, absolutely. And it's almost, what would Chris Whitty do now?
If you could change, or for the HR professionals that respond to the survey, if it was an area of employment law you could change. Now, I like this question for you, because actually you're working in a law firm. So, you know, I'm not saying you're necessarily in a better position to be able to answer this question or not, but you've got an interesting perspective of working very closely in your team and specifically focusing on sorting out and resolving employment issues within business. Which area did you think would want to be changed? Because I'll share in a minute what the outcome is, which I think you know. But what was the area that you thought was a priority to be changed as a law?
I think probably around flexible working, and I think that's because the process at the moment is very transactional type processes, deadlines and timescales and things like that has to be applied, and you can only make one request in a year and things like that. Whereas workforces now need to be much more adaptable and agile, and be able to respond to different needs. And I think that's an area that probably needs to be reviewed to meet future workforces.
And it was by far and away the lead response, which resonates with a lot of professionals. You also mentioned, because I've had a look at your specific responses, on the right to disconnect. And could you just explain a little bit about that, what that means?
Yeah, so the right to disconnect from work, basically. So being able to switch off. And I think this probably goes hand in hand with flexible working. So often the consequence, maybe, of flexible working, having different working patterns, different places of work, might mean that people are not disconnecting from work and not having that separation between work and life. So, for example, home working. I think obviously all of us, or many of us, experience a degree of home working over the last few years, and the challenges that can pose in being able to just switch off from work and be able to get back into life and other things that you need to do. And I think that has sort of overrun. The two have got a bit mixed up at times for some people, and the impact of that can unfortunately mean the mental health concerns, and that means that not only does life suffer, but work can ultimately suffer too. So that right to disconnect just gives people that opportunity to recharge, reset, concentrate on other things, and then be able to come back and give your best at work.
Yeah, and I think I 100% agree with what you're saying on that point, because with not only the technology, which is always supposed to make our lives easier, and singularly failed in that regard, we're all doing a lot more because it expects us to do a lot more. So there is that as well, but also the fact that there's a certain element of, it depends on the personality. You know, there are those people that would be, you know, dialing it in, coming to work in their dressing gown or whatever, because they're working from home. And those that were conscientious, I think this is speaking of the vast majority of the workforce, to be conscientious enough to want to go the extra, to prove that working from home was actually, you know, something that they were being productive about. And their response to that would be they'd be working in the time they probably were going to be commuting, and probably working beyond the times that they were. They might even work through their lunch hour, or even because I think, well, it's only 5 minutes to the fridge, and situations where they find themselves putting in a much longer day than they would be if they were in the traditional office. And I think all that can tire you out, basically.
Absolutely. Just no opportunity, I guess, for switch off and being able to step away. And technology does play a massive part in that, because I think that the speed in which communication, or people feel the need to communicate, is so much quicker now than, you know, when I first started work, you even had internal memos going around places. So it's, you know, this.
I remember those.
Exactly. So, but now you have an email, and there's almost a need to instantly reply to that email. And you know, from a customer or client point of view, that's great, because they're getting a very prompt, efficient service. But the more you do that, the more that needs to happen. And I think for some people that becomes very difficult and very challenging to maintain that productivity, particularly if you're not having that chance to switch off.
And there have been surveys, I think, an analysis of people working from home, interestingly enough. I mean, there were some famous figures who came out and have been quite strident about, you know, get back to work, as if people have been slacking, which is really not helpful. Mentioning no names, but I think Lord Sugar knows who I'm talking about. With the situation we find ourselves in looking at actual proper research, Stanford University did a piece before all of the pandemic, and we're looking at this because it was something that it was a conversation happening, wasn't it? People were talking more and more about the flexibility of work. The pandemic forced it upon us, and the proof of the pudding, because the Stanford University research bore it out, was actually productivity increased as a result of working from home. And you now have an opportunity to say, right, okay, which employment law area do we want to review / change? Which is an area that is really not working for us? I mean, I'm sure you must have a view on that.
Well, there's a couple of areas I would focus on relating to pay gap reporting, one which isn't law at all at the moment, so I would be looking to bring it in, is ethnicity pay gap reporting. And my own view is that's a major gap at the moment within the UK. The government had, there seemed to be a direction of travel that it was going to come into force, but in the past few months, I think it was late last year, they decided they weren't going to do it.
Yep.
And rather they've left it on a voluntary basis for employers, albeit they have quite recently issued guidance which will be helpful to employers who are looking to go down the route of voluntary ethnicity pay gap reporting. But it is a significant issue in the UK. I was looking at some recent statistics from the Office for National Statistics, which just highlighted the differentials between various different ethnicities in terms of pay. So it's undoubtedly an issue, and unfortunately it's not something that is a legal requirement at the moment. So that's the one I would wave the magic wand to. The government have sort of put it into the long grass. I don't think they've abandoned it completely, and they may just get people more comfortable with looking at it. It's more complicated, obviously, than gender pay gap reporting because you're dealing with a variety of different ethnicities. Gender pay gap reporting is a little bit more straightforward. So it's perhaps getting organisations used to it, and certainly many larger organisations in particular are embracing the challenge of it. With the battle for talent raging, they realise they need to be getting this right to ensure they're getting the best people. And on that, sorry, David, yeah.
I'm just going to say on the point of reporting, I think there was an assumption, maybe naive on part of the government or of those people that were undertaking it. Report it and it'll sort itself out. It will adjust. We will find us at that. And I think the ONS data proves that it's not improving. We're a long way away from where we need to be with it.
Well, that's right. And it's a similar story of the gender pay gap reporting, which is the other area that I would like to see more action taken. Obviously, we've had it for a few years now, but there was, again, recent statistics which showed that the dial had not moved if you're going back, I think, 5 years or so, and we're exactly where we were 5 years ago. I think it's about 9.4% or something like that, gender pay gap. And obviously, just to highlight, the gender pay gap isn't about males getting paid more than females for doing the same job. It's about average pay. And the reality that there is such a significant pay gap is because, on the whole, female employers are doing lower paid jobs. There's more female employees doing lower paid jobs than there are male employees doing those lower paid jobs. So there's all sorts of reasons for that. I think one of the main reasons for it at times is a lack of flexibility amongst employers, so that female employees feel they can't move up and perform a more senior role on a flexible basis. So it'd be quite interesting to see if anything can be done around that. I appreciate there's very much a trend towards flexible working at the moment, but even now, I think the stats show something like 9 out of 10 employees would like flexible working, but only 1 out of 10 job adverts actually promote flexible working. So there is a bit of a discrepancy there in terms of what employers are saying versus what's actually happening in reality.
And our survey certainly supports those views, in is that almost a quarter of respondents placed flexible working as their area of law that they wanted to see addressed. Employment law must feature quite strongly in terms of the remit of areas of legislation that you will consider when you're looking at your own particular area. What would you say, looking at the current statute and looking at the way in which we're managing employment law in this country, what would you, if you were given an opportunity and you're introduced into the government to do this wonderful job and they'd actually listen to you and pay attention to your advice, what area of law would you focus on to change and to improve or introduce?
I'm going to flip it into health and safety management, because that's obviously, just to be cheeky, but it does, health and safety and employment law, jigsaws itself into themselves. So I think I would like to look at the competency of the people that are in charge. I would like there to be some set of parameters and a greater liability. So the buck just stops with you.
Yeah.
Because at the moment, it's all a bit whiffly waffly, isn't it?
Yeah. Accountability.
Accountability, that's a very good, sensible word, isn't it? Accountability.
There's not much of that going around in certain areas. I think that focus on that wouldn't do any harm.
And I don't know particularly which piece of law that would fit into, but in my world, it would fit into the Health and Safety at Work, etc. Act. It's a fantastic piece of legislation. written in 1973, but it still covers, it covered the pandemic perfectly, but I think the accountability, someone just needs to have the competency. And I think with competency, we need to get away from training. It's not just training, it's attitude. And it's how you put your training or your knowledge into being.
Yeah.
So just not a tick box, I've got this qualification, therefore I can manage.
Yeah.
It's I've got this, but I've also got this experience.
Mentoring. In our survey, 73% of respondents gave a positive response to actually encountering, working with, engaging mentoring processes in their workplace. Is that something you would concur with?
Yes, I think that's a really sort of effective way for employers to develop their staff. I think it needs careful consideration and planning, I think, because you want to ensure that there's some framework to work within for the mentors and the mentees. But many organizations now are looking to sort of grow their own, as I like to phrase it. So looking to develop perhaps more junior roles to work their way up, have a career path. And the opportunities then presented to them through mentoring programs, I think, ensures that they're equipped with the right skills and knowledge to progress when opportunities arrive. So I think it's a really valuable way of perhaps attracting staff, if you have a mentoring program in place, attracting new people to come in and work with you, but also developing and retaining those that you already have. And using the skills of somebody who's much more experienced, perhaps a more senior person in that program, can give them an insight into what to expect in those types of roles. And the reality of those roles, not just what a job description perhaps might say. So I think it's really, really effective way of developing future talent.
And for a position where you're finding yourself at the moment, I mean, we will touch on sort of recruitment and retention, but just generally making the experience at work more, beneficial for individuals, so that they understand what their meaningful part is, what they're actually supposed to be doing at work. Having a mentor there just to give them a steer into the right direction can be invaluable.
Absolutely.
I mean, I actively mentor. I've actually previously run mentoring programs, so I've got a bit of vested interest. I actually really am a big fan of the process. But one thing I would say as well is, whilst I'm, been around long enough, and by the way, I'm old enough to remember times when you had desks with no computers on them. I am that old. So, I have had some experience, but equally, you have to understand that generational diversity is something where actually you could have a mentor who might be in their 20s for somebody who's in their 50s, because they actually have a much better understanding of technology. They've got an intuitive approach to things like social media. And it could be that, you need to get a little bit more, nuanced with the way you approach things, and having somebody with those skills could be great. So there's the reverse side of this as well, which I think.
Absolutely. And I think mentoring can be used for lots of different type of development. So it might be career mentoring. So somebody, if you're aiming to aspire to a particular role, then you might have a mentor in that profession. You might have a very specific skill that you need to enhance. So you might have somebody being able to that. I would even pull into that buddy type arrangements, maybe for new employees. They can act as a type of mentor as well in settling you into a new organization. So I think there's lots of opportunity there for different reasons for people to be developed in a variety of ways.
23. What would you say are your priorities based on what you've seen so far, the trends that emerged in 2022? What are the areas that you would see, in particular with HR, you would want to see brought into place, maybe in your own organisation?
Well, I think certainly speaking more generally, and in terms of the conversations I'm having with clients, it's still very much the battle for talent that people are speaking about, and in particular retention, which I know came out in the survey responses as well, David. And I think it's a fact of life at the moment. People are much more ready to move around and work somewhere, but then quite quickly go somewhere else if there's more being paid for that particular role. So I think with the effects of inflation, that sort of thing. There's a lot of pressure on employers to get the salary side of things right, but it's obviously not just about salary, it's about the overall employee experience, and certainly having a lot of discussions with employers around those sorts of topics, and interesting just to hear what employers are doing to try and make their place of work an attractive place to be. And a lot of it comes down to culture, because money can only take you so far, but the culture of the organisation is extremely important. It's how you best you drive that culture to make it a very attractive place to work, where you can retain and attract talent.
And also being self-aware to know when there is an issue with the culture. And I think we've recently seen some kind of slightly off topic, but there's been a few cases recently where people have found themselves, let's say, on the wrong end of accusations of bullying or intimidation, or generally not encouraging their staff within an organization or being supportive of them in situations of whistleblowing. So, having an opportunity of being open and transparent, and actually not only just talking about it, but living it as well in your culture, I think is going to be increasingly important. There's a higher bar of expectation, I think, for employees now.
Yeah, very much so, and it absolutely needs to be a top-down approach to that sort of cultural issue in terms of really driving the culture. But I think you're absolutely right. There is a greater expectation on employees' parts, and they know that other options are available. And as long as the unemployment rates in the UK remain low, this is always going to be a significant issue, as they are at the moment. I think it's some of the lowest unemployment we've seen for a long time, which means that there's greater demand for employees than ever before.
I mean, in terms of the challenges now, looking forward, projecting forward in your role and about maybe risk and thinking about other areas of HR, what do you think are going to be the greatest challenges over the next sort of year or two?
Oh, that's a really tough question, isn't it?
I like it.
Yes, I know you like it. Tough question. Making it up. I think keeping everybody happy, trying to get people off social media and listening to the dreadful stuff that's out there.
Looking at the priorities for people within HR specifically, what do you think? I'm going to move straight into this one now, but in terms of the priorities for HR, when we looked at the survey, the results that came through, we've already mentioned the well-being piece. Yeah. That was unsurprisingly top of the shop. Would you agree with that, or do you have any other areas that you think would be, well, actually that's all well and good, but actually this is more important?
I think well-being is the umbrella that everything can fit under, because if your staff, your team are happy, and I say happy and feel successful, because whatever that is means different things for different people, everything else will flow. Yeah. If you've got unhappy, uneasy, unfulfilled, unsatisfied team members, you've not got a business. Full stop.
Yeah, it's about the understanding what they've got to do to make a difference in the business,
and their role within the business. What a crucial cog they are in the whole wheel.
It is about. I mean, you I think you nailed it in talking about being happy, and ultimately,
happiness means different things.
Of course, it does, and I think what it means for anybody who's running an organisation is not to go around with a clown suit on trying to make everybody laugh. It is about ensuring that people feel fulfilled in their jobs. They understand what it is they've got to do, and they also understand the guidelines, as in the boundaries that you've referenced. Because if we know that, then we should be able to function. And if somebody falls outside of the rails on that, there needs to be a conversation. Because
I think that goes back to a job description or an advert or the interview, the first few weeks of induction. We've got to get our foundations right, haven't we? And I think that's possibly gone, for some organisations, a bit awry.
What about opportunities? Is there a flip side to that? What are the opportunities, do you think, that might exist?
I think the flip side is the absolute word, because although it's a challenge, there's a huge opportunity for employers who are getting it right in terms of attracting the best talent, because, as I've just said, people are willing to move, and if you can attract talent from elsewhere, then there's huge opportunities to get the best people and to retain the best people. And I think it's about employers being as looking to attract as diverse talent as possible. I mean, the gender pay gap, the ethnicity pay gap would suggest that employers are still not getting that quite right. So in the context of really struggling at times to attract and retain talent, you query whether they're going about it the right way. And it may be it's something that should be reviewed, particularly in circumstances where the same processes and procedures have largely been used for many years in terms of recruitment. And it may be that now is a very good time to look at that. Is the process, does it make it less attractive to females or harder for females for whatever reason? Similarly with those from an ethnic background as well, are there any barriers that are there, both internally and externally, in terms of promotion and progression in an organisation? But I think a really good time for organisations really to take stock, because there can be a tendency year after year to do the same things and take the same approach. But the old rule book, in a sense, has been ripped up in terms of people wanting to always being at the behest effect of the employer, rather a lot of the time it's the employer that's having to sell the workplace and the job to the individual.
Yeah, I 100% with the outline of the breakdown of tailoring the recruitment process to meet the needs of the candidates and broadening that reach. And one of the areas that I'm very passionate about is the generational diversity as well. You know, it's gender, it's ability, neurodiversity, but also generational. Given that there were quite a few 50 plus who decided that during lockdowns and the pandemic that maybe it was time to take early retirement.
Yeah, it's a really
they're a bit
good
bored
point
now and they want to get back into the place of work.
No, it is a really good point, because again, insofar as individuals are struggling to attract people at time, there's a huge body of individuals out there who are highly experienced who, for whatever reason, have taken a step back. But if employers can tap into that and attract people back, or indeed people who are just looking for a slight change in direction. So, and again, I think certainly if you go back a number of years, there did tend to be at times an attitude from employers that people were potentially over the hill beyond a certain age, and there's no point recruiting so and so because they're only going to be with us for another 2 or 3 years. But I mean, I'm not sure what the average time spent is now. It'd be quite an interesting statistics to know a bit more about the average time spent by an individual at an organisation, but I suspect it's an awful lot less than it was before, such that concerns about people retiring in 5 years' time or whatever really shouldn't be a factor anymore at all, because that might very well be longer than you would get someone at a different age and stage.
I think it maps the generational diversity in that boomers and Gen X probably were quite comfortable with looking at somewhere getting towards, at one stage in history, 10 years, as 8 to 10 years. Whereas now that's come right down to below 5 years. And as you move through the generations of millennials into Gen Z, you're looking at an average tenure now of somewhere between 2 to 3 years. So it's drastically reducing, and the generations are coming down to meet that lower period. So,
and it also raises some very interesting questions just around the recruitment process, the cost of recruitment processes. And I know a lot of organisations now are trying to do more internally, either by bringing people on internally or indeed doing the recruitment side of things themselves internally to keep costs down, with a view to then actually doing external recruitment, but from an internal source rather than outsourcing it to recruitment agents, from a point of view of keeping costs down. And I think that does become more and more stark when the length of time someone remains at an organisation is decreasing.
It's going to be great. The point on risk for you, because that's your raison d'etre, that's your business, what it's all about. We've come through the issues with the pandemic, through COVID, and what are you seeing right now, as you think as a result of our life experience over the last 3 years in business? Are there any areas of business which are actually, you think, far riskier, or there's greater danger being or more risks being taken?
I think people's perception of risk has changed. I think people's financial risk has changed, and that has an impact on their attitude. They may want to do 2 or 3 jobs or work extra hours because they're fearful of losing everything. I'm seeing a chasm. Some people are much more sensible with their risk management, and others are going to an extreme. So we just can't do that anymore. Well, yes, you can. We just need to think about it a little bit. And I think it's pulling everybody's expectations together and facing next year, the year after, but with openness and honesty. I think the cost of living crisis is an interesting conversation at the moment. Some people just are not getting it. Some people don't understand what other folks have to deal with. Yeah. If you're worried about money, that takes over every single minute of your day. What can I have? What can I have to eat? Can I pay this bill? You're constantly juggling. And if you haven't got a mortgage and you've got loads of money, you don't even think about whether you can buy something. And I think this chasm of, I could sound like I'm on my socialist ranty box now, but between the rich and the poor. And I think we've got to do something much more about pulling that together.
But I just want to know if there was anything that actually struck you as a bit of a surprise in the survey, something that you probably thought, oh, I'm interested in that one. That was a bit different.
Yes, I think a couple of things possibly. One thing was that data security issues seem to be not quite as high up the pecking order of things that were being focused on as I would have expected. That said, part of that may be that it doesn't lie solely within the remit of HR, and many organizations will have different departments, people dealing with that. So that might be the explanation of that, because I do think we're in a world where data security is really something that needs to be, very high up the agenda at all times.
Agreed.
And the other one, which is quite interesting as well, was that AI was again relatively low down, albeit I can understand that one a bit more, because I think that is something which is probably more for the future, but we're certainly hearing more and more about it, including in an employment context, and the potential implication from an employment context of AI being used much more frequently than it has been in the past. So some really interesting things to come, I suspect, over the coming years, but I suspect that the AI side of things will certainly creep up the agenda as time, if not leap up the agenda as time goes on.
That is an excellent point. And it's interestingly, looking at the timeline, I'm now reflecting back on the timeline of the survey, which was around about February time of 2023. It was just at the point when I think ChatGPT was starting to get talked about in great swathes, and suddenly it took over. If you were to do the survey now, I think our next survey might have quite a different take on AI stands.
Yeah, and I think one of the very interesting things about, you mentioned Chat GPT, and one of the things that's interesting is there's a complete disconnect between the number of employers who understand it's being used in their organization versus the number of employees who say they're using it for work. So I think that's going to lead to some issues as well that need to be addressed, and it is something I think that employers need to almost catch up in many cases with what's actually going on.
Yes. There were, as you know, there were a lot of questions in this survey, over 20 of them. So we don't want to cover all of them here. Otherwise, we'll be, you haven't got the time because you're obviously really, really very busy. So what we want to do is just focus on some other areas. I'm going to ask a question. Were there any surprises that you found in the survey? Anything that sort of stood out that you thought, oh, really?
For me, no. I think it's quite, based on what my experience and things, I thought it really reflected what I'm experiencing at the moment. So in my role, providing lots of HR support to lots of different clients. So wasn't a huge surprise in there. But good to see, I guess reassuring to see that people are having similar challenges.
Yes.
It's always nicer to be reassured than that. But
it was one of the things I was quite keen to make sure that the report, for anybody who took part in the survey, were able to get hold of a copy of the report, because it's really important to know how where are you against your peers? What is this situation I'm in at the moment? Am I, because it's quite a lonely business. A lot of roles, senior roles in organizations, can be quite lonely. So it was quite useful to see that, but reassuring as well from HReSource's point
exactly.
that we've got the right responses. Also, looking now at this year that we've got ahead of us, what does it tell us about HR management in 2023? What do you think are the biggest challenges that those in your sort of roles are facing?
I think the big ones are probably similar to last year. Big one I'm experiencing, I think was reflected in the survey, really was around recruitment and retention.
Yeah.
That's still a huge challenge for employers to try and find the people who have got the right skills, knowledge, experience they need for their roles.
Yes.
And to entice them away from their current employers. And I think because when you think about it, one employer is going to have a recruitment issue, but then another employer is going to have a retention issue. They're going to want to hold on to those people as long as they can. And you almost get into a battle around, who's the better employer, who's going to offer that unique value proposition, that an employer can have. Is it coming down to money? Who's going to pay the better salary and provide the better benefit? So I think we're in a real battle at the moment of trying to find people to fill vacancies. And I think interestingly that, there's a lot of concern that there wouldn't be jobs coming out of the pandemic, but there's a lot of jobs. The problem is there's not enough candidates.
Yes, it's really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's that lost workforce of individuals that actually there's an awful lot. I mean, there was a survey that came out, the ONS, not survey, but the data that came out from the ONS last week, telling us about the number of individuals in the workforce who are just sick. The continuation of issues from the pandemic, or delaying diagnosis, or being able to get to the NHS. There are a lot of people who are now out of the workforce because they're sick, but also a number of people who decided, you know what, I think I'm going to take early retirement. And we're in a position in this country with the way our pension systems work, where that can be afforded to do, whereas that's not necessarily the same in other parts of Europe or the world.
No, absolutely. And we're now feeling the effects of that, I think. Yeah. Although initially, lockdown time and stuff, the effects weren't quite as clear. Now it's the after effect of it is coming to fruition, I think, and we're really struggling to find people for particular roles. So I think that was the main thing coming out of the survey, which I wasn't surprised about. I'm not sure if I know what the answer is to try and
that was my next question. So just explain what the perfect answer is. There isn't one.
No, there isn't one. There isn't one at the moment. But it's just trying to set, as an employer, I guess, just trying to position yourself where people will want to come work for you. And it's not, I don't think it is just about the remuneration that you can offer, but about all the other bits around it, particularly the health and well-being or the wellness agenda at the moment as well. I think employers really need to look at that and to try and show others that they can look after their employees.
Exactly.
So there's a lot of things to think about to try and attract people.
We won't touch on the 4-day week because that's for another individual to talk about. We've talked about it again before. But that, again, you can look at a range of different initiatives that people might be able to bring into the whole proposition more attractive. I certainly don't think that that's a topic that's going to go away anytime soon.
No.
Lucy, thank you very much for your time today. I know how busy you are, as demonstrated by the output of the survey. HR people are very much involved in both translating the strategic direction of the business and making sure that those who are working in it to deliver it are in the best shape they possibly can be. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, David.